So in today's Warthunder video, we're going to be looking at all of the Shermans whenever it comes to Warthunder, how to identify them, and also the weak spots that each of the Shermans have. So we're going to be splitting this video up into two parts. We're going to have the low tier Shermans, which you'll see all the way to battle rating 4.0. And then all of the Shermans that are after the battle rating of 4.0 will be using a different gun. So you have a better idea on how to actually engage these types of targets. If you want to see videos very similar to this one, recommend another series of tanks that you would love to see whenever it comes to the weak spots and as well as identify them. Most likely next is probably going to be the IS series of tanks. So if that's something that you want to see, make sure to leave that in the comments. But at the end of the day, remember this, whenever it comes to Shermans, like I feel like they don't really need a ton of weak spots, especially depending on what gun that you have. For example, like the Panthers or the Tigers, especially like a Tiger too. You can just lull in Shermans. Like there's not really a big issue whenever it comes to those vehicles. But at the same time, you do have vehicles like the T-34s, like the early ones, and then also the KV-1s. And then at the mid tiers, whenever it comes to those Shermans, some of them are actually pretty good whenever it comes to deflecting shots, especially stuff like the Jumbo Sherman, which can be a little bit tough of a tank to actually crack. So the vehicles that we're going to be using within this video to actually do it is going to be the T-34E, and then also for the mid tiers, whenever it comes to the Jumbos, the Fireflies, and the rest of the Shermans, which have the 76s, we'll be using the Panzer IV whenever it comes to that. So we'll have a good idea of how you should actually engage these tanks. Now let's get on to the video. First vehicle that we have here is the M4A1 Sherman. This vehicle can be found in the French tech tree and as well as the American tech tree. So this means even if you're an American, you can actually face this tank if France is actually playing it. The thing about the M4A1 Sherman is that since it's the very first variant and compared to all the other variants of the Shermans within the game, this vehicle, relatively speaking, is pretty easy to take out. The only good thing about this vehicle is that, for example, with the KV-1, it kind of has like a little bit of a trolley armor problem of where, for example, normally you could go for the driver's hatch, but as you can see right there with that shot, it most likely won't pin. We can do the same thing on the other side of the tank as well, but the question is, will it actually pin this go around? And no, it doesn't. It's a very finicky thing. I would never go for the driver's hatches if you're in something like the KV-1, and to be quite honest with you, nothing really should ever go for the driver's hatches on the M4A1. But the thing about this one is that the normal weak spots compared to all of the other Shermans that we're going to be talking about, especially for the early T-34s or the KV-1s, aren't really a thing. See, as we see right there, it also does not pin. So the way that I would honestly take these things out is that you have really three positions that you can shoot this tank in. You can go for the lower hole. So if you meet the machine gun right here and come over here, it should directly go through it. And then also at the very top of the tank right here, you should actually be able to go through the Sherman as well once we do get a reload in. So that's another spot that I would just go for. And then the third and final spot that I would go for is just up here at the actual turret. So like if it's hold down, don't go for the turret ring or go for around the side of the turret. Just go directly beside the gun and it should basically pin every time. Now, another thing about the M4A1 Sherman is that you have weak spots like this, where I believe it's like a little radio antenna that you can shoot for if that's the only thing that you can see. It is a pretty good weak spot to go for, and that's honestly one of the weak spots that kind of just remember what it is. Now, because of the way that the cast of the Sherman hull is actually done, if you're ever at an angle of the Sherman, and like let's just say he's angling and you just can't pin it, like I don't think this should be able to pin. Well, it still does. I'd still just go for that shot. But the thing that you can do is that you can go for these areas where the hull actually is just a little bit angled and a little bit weird. You'll see it on more variants of the Shermans whenever we go down the tree, but that is one of the ways to take out the M4A1. And now let's get on to the second tank, which is just your regular M4 Sherman. So the next variant of the Sherman that we have here is the regular M4 Sherman. The differences between the M4 Sherman is that the hull is actually completely different compared to the M4A1. As you can see right here, the M4A1 is more of a cast design, and then the M4 is a kind of welded design. The only problem about the M4 Sherman is that I would even say that it kind of gives a little bit more weak spots than the regular M4, especially if you have a decently pinning sized gun. Like this vehicle itself, like you may think these added plates actually do anything on the front of the Sherman, but no, it's one of the most easiest Shermans to take out, especially if they're showing the hull. And even if they are actually hull down and you can't see these positions, all you gotta do is just go directly for the turret ring, and it's just a basically easy kill whenever it comes to these variants of the Sherman. The thing is that I really just wouldn't do about this Sherman is that I really wouldn't try to go for like shots like this or something like that. I would definitely try to just go for turret ring, or if you can see these little welded plates that are supposed to give it more armor, which actually kind of just help out most rounds just pin, that's where I would go for on the regular M4 Sherman. Like there really isn't that much of an issue whenever it comes to pinning this tank with pretty much any cannon within the game. Yes, you do also have this spot over there that you can pin, but to be quite honest with you, I would just shoot for either one of these sides of the tank. Or if he's hold down, go for the turret ring. The next vehicle we have here is probably the Sherman that's going to give you a ton of problems whenever it comes to actually pinning it, because from the front, it actually doesn't really have that many weak spots. You do have the MG port that you can shoot right there, but other than that, this whole entire hole, I wouldn't really count on actually pinning it whenever it comes to a gun like the 76 on like a T-34, for example. The only shot that you really have that's going to be able to take out this Sherman is going for the turret ring shot, which is right there. I would say that is probably the most reliable place to go for on the M4A2. Just the only difference is from the M4A2, from like the M4 right there, is that you don't have these welded plates on the front of it, which just makes it a ton harder to actually kill this tank whenever it comes to Warthunder. But yeah, that's how at least I would engage this tank. If you can't get a good shot, like if they're wiggling the barrel or anything like that, definitely just shoot the gun out. That is one of the best ways to get rid of the Sherman whenever it comes to Warthunder. So now we're looking at the M4A3 105. The way to tell the Sherman compared to the other Sherman is just look at the cannon barrel. It looks just different. Like whenever you're playing Warthunder for so long, you'll just be able to tell this thing apart from every other Sherman. But the thing about it is that it has the same whole design as this tank right here, the M4A2, which means that battle rating of 3.0, this thing is insanely strong whenever it comes to actually using the hull as armor. So the thing about it is that this hull, once again, I would say is completely off bounds unless you can get a shot towards the actual gun port. That's the only shot that I would ever take on the hull. But whenever it comes to the tank itself, because the turret itself is a little bit bigger, I do believe, compared to the other Sherman turrets, maybe it's not, but at the same time, you'll be able to go for the corners of these tanks, and it's very, very easy to take this Sherman out. And then once again, if you're very unsure about how to actually engage a tank like this, the best thing to do about it, especially since this gun is super big, is just take out the gun. Just shoot it. It's not that hard. Track the tank and they get on the side of them, and it should be a really easy kill. But if you have the option to actually shoot for the side of the turret, it's basically an insta kill every single time whenever it comes to a vehicle like the T-34. So now we're on to our first weird variant of the Sherman, which is the Calliope. The Calliope has these M8 rockets on the top of the tank, which gives it a little bit of a special ability, mainly being able to blind enemies whenever it comes to actually shooting them. So the tank itself is the same Sherman that is all the way down here with the M4 Sherman, but this one has the rockets. So the thing that you need to know about this vehicle is that, yes, you can still shoot for the same weak spots. As you can see, this one's still a thing. Those two will also be the same thing. But let's just say that you maim this tank. Let's just say that you shoot out the cannon, right? So you get a cannon shot like that. The thing about it is that now he still has the rockets that shoot at you. So if you ever get a shot on a Calliope, and let's just say you don't instantly kill it, use your MG and just MG this over and over and over until it actually breaks. Because the thing about it is he can definitely blind you, and if you get another shell in, let's just say that you can't pin him or something, destroy this, and then he will not be able to actually shoot at you anymore whenever it comes at tank. And depending on what update we're in, and depending on how they want the Calliope to act, sometimes this ammo racks the tank, sometimes it doesn't. But at the end of the day, that's what you need to do with this thing, and then just go for the regular weak spots whenever it comes to any of the Shermans, whenever it comes to Warthunder, and this thing is just super easy to take out whenever it comes to Warthunder. The cool thing about the Calliope is that it does not have a 50 cal, so it can't really track and get around you, which is a pretty cool thing, but it still has the same weak spots as the regular M4, just it has the rockets, which can be quite annoying sometimes. So now we're done with the American low tier Shermans. Now we're on to the Shermans, which are in the other tech trees within Warthunder, and actually have a little bit of a different playstyle compared to the ones that are within the American tech tree. So this one right here is the Sherman II. It is basically the exact same tank down there as the M4A1, except for it has this little water thing, which is pretty funny. You can't MG it or anything, so it does make it look like it's a little bit of a different variant of a tank, but it's still the same exact tank. You can just go directly through the top, go directly through the bottom, or go through the sides, and then also the turret itself right here. So it's not really that huge of a difference whenever it comes to the upgrades of it. It's just a kind of a recognition thing. Even though it has a little water thing, it is just a regular M4A1. So it's not the best in the world, and it should be pretty easy to take out. So next vehicle we have here is the German Sherman, which is just a regular M4 Sherman. The way that you're actually able to determine this is the German Sherman, especially if you're in an RB game, is just look at the paint scheme. Most people still have this paint scheme on it, which is very different compared to other Shermans with the American tech tree, or just other Shermans in general, as you can see. The thing about the German Sherman is that it still has the same weak spots as the Sherman right down here with the M4A2. So you definitely don't want to go for the hull unless you can see the machine gun right there. That's probably the only weak spot that I would ever go for on the hull. The thing about the Sherman is if you're sitting from the front of it, you definitely still just want to go for the turret ring itself, and it should nuke this tank basically every time. But yeah, this is a German Sherman. It's a very, very rare event vehicle. It's probably going to be very rare that you ever see this, except for the events whenever it comes to Warthunder, because some people like to play this thing because it is a rank 3 and it gives them event scores. So other than that, it's just a regular Sherman. You can definitely just go for the sides of the turret and it should be pretty much an insta kill every single time whenever it comes to Warthunder. So the next vehicle here is the M4A4. You can find this vehicle within the Chinese tech tree and also the French tech tree, but in layman's terms, it's really not that different of a Sherman whenever it comes to Warthunder. It still has the same weak spots. As you can see, these welded plates on the front basically are just a shoot me button. Both of those sides will pin pretty much every single time. You also have like a little radio antenna spot that can also be pinned. So it's pretty much a GG like vehicle whenever it comes to Warthunder. But the only thing about it is that the turret itself can be a little bit trolly, but at the same time you still have the little sides that you can shoot on the Sherman, which is just the same. The only thing to really note about it is that the Sherman itself, or at least China's, because they use the Chinese variant, doesn't have a 50 cal. So I guess that's a positive for it, especially since it can't track and barrel torture you to death. But at the same time, it's a Sherman that if you see it, you still just go for the welded parts and it should be an insta kill pretty much every single time. So now we're on to the M4A175W. Honestly speaking, this is probably the most like different variant of the Sherman that you can see at the lower battle ratings. The thing about this Sherman is that the mantlet itself, or the turret itself, is actually pretty good because, like, for example, if you shoot for that, the turret mantlet would just basically stop a lot of the low pinning APHE rounds within the game. The problem about this vehicle is, as you can see, it's a hole that is very, very similar to the very first Sherman that we've seen at the very start of the video. So really all this means that you can aim for like right here and to go directly through the tank, and it's not really a huge issue whenever it comes to this vehicle. But the only thing to really note about it is that the turret itself is pretty strong. So if this tank is hulled down, the really only shot that you have for it is shooting for about like right in here, and get very lucky that you don't get volumetric or something like that and hit the lower portion of the hull, and it should just do basically the same thing. So yeah, this thing is like okay whenever it comes to Warthunder. It's probably going to be a variant of the Sherman that you don't see a ton of, but at the same time it is probably one of the strongest whenever it comes to turret because it's just different compared to every other variant of the Sherman at low tiers. Alright, so the last Sherman that we have here is for Sweden, and it's the Sherman III. Now, I do want to point out something because I know someone is actually going to do the actually type of comment within the comments of saying, well, you can just frontally pin these with this type of gun. I do know this, so this is why for the last thing we're going to show something here. As you can see, this vehicle doesn't have an MG port whenever it comes to the rest of the Sherman variants, which means, technically speaking, that it should have a less amount of weak spots, especially for the hull. Now, for a vehicle like this, because of the range and also the angle and all that sort of stuff, it can just go directly through it. It doesn't matter. And then also for the rest of the tank itself, it can just go directly through it. So that's why instead of the MD8 round, we're going to be using the MD5 round to give a better of an example for this vehicle in general. So the vehicle itself, the hull for a low pinning APHE shell, I just wouldn't even go for. As you can see, once we switch the rounds right there, it doesn't pin. It goes for pretty much all of these tanks whenever it comes to the Warthunder, but and you see nothing whenever it comes to, so this hull, if you don't have a good pinning gun or you don't have like the MD8 round, I would definitely say just don't even go for it at all. Go directly for the turret cheeks themselves, and it should be an easy kill basically every single time. The Sherman III is one of those vehicles and one of those lineups that you'll see a ton because this is a really good vehicle to do events with. The SAV is also in this lineup as well. So you're going to see a ton of Sherman 3.4s, especially when Warthunder's having any sort of event whenever it comes to the game. But the easy way to take this thing out, especially if you only have something like the MD5 round, is to just go for a turret, and it's the easiest way to destroy the Sherman 3s. Now we're on to the mid-tier Shermans, and we're going to do some of the variants of the Shermans as well at the end of the line here. But the thing about these Shermans is that you really have to remember that they don't really have a ton of armor specifically within their battle rating bracket. The only two that I would ever say really has decent armor is the jumbos. Like, those are the only twos that I would say is good whenever it comes to their armor values. But the rest of these, to be quite honest with you, I mean, you can just center mass mode for them with most of the cannons within the game whenever it comes to the battle rating bracket. Even the Panzer IV, which I would say is the lower end of the vehicles that you would ever see in these Shermans, can go directly through pretty much all of these except for the jumbos. Like, that's the big thing that you really do have to know about these vehicles within the game. So the first one here is the M4A1. The distincting factor of it is that it actually has a 76mm gun compared to the one within the Chinese tech tree. So whenever you see this vehicle, this means that it's going to have a relatively good gun. It's a battle rating of 5.0, but the turret itself and then also the tank itself for the battle rating is pretty poor. I mean, even with the Panzer IV gun, it can just go directly through the turret. There's basically no armor on this thing, and I really don't think there's a weak spot to actually be told, because most tanks would just consider this whole tank a pretty much a weak spot whenever it comes to this vehicle. So now we're on to the M4A2 76W, and the way to tell this tank apart compared to all the other tanks whenever it comes to Shermans is that it has a little cloth canvas on the turret ring itself and also the turret mantlet. So that's the easiest way to determine this vehicle. Once again, it's another Sherman, which really doesn't have that much of armor. I mean, this is a Panzer IV. It can directly just go through the center mass of this tank. You're going to be fighting Panthers, you're going to be fighting Tigers, which easily will be able to pin you. The only saving grace of this vehicle is that you have a 76 with a stabilizer, and it's a really solid gun. Even the turret itself, you will still be able to pin. The only difference that I would say compared to this vehicle right here and then this vehicle is that your turret itself is pretty much the same, but if you look at the hull, you can sometimes get a interesting angle shot, but I won't be able to like show it off right here because we're just way too close. But you can sometimes get some like random bounces because if you hit a very sharp angle on the tank, for example, like right here, it's automatically going to bounce whenever it comes to the tank. But overall, once again, the vehicles that you're going to be facing within this thing pretty much consider your whole tank a weak spot. So there's not really that much to actually describe about the M4A276W. So the next vehicle we have here is the M4A376W. And if you want to know what the W means within all of the tank names, it just means that it has a wet rack whenever it comes to the ammo rack. But the way that you can determine the Easy 8 or the M4A3 is just by the stance of the tank. As you can compare it to other vehicles like the M4A2 right here, if you look at the suspension and look at the tracks, it is completely different compared to the other thing. Also, look at the like fenders. They're also wider whenever it comes to this tank. But once again, it's a tank that can just be frontally pinned by most of the stuff that you're going to be finding. There's not really a huge weak spot to this vehicle, other than this has a little bit more mobility, and sometimes with the hull of the tank, it can sometimes bounce shots. But yeah, overall, you're not really going to do much with this tank. The only differences that really matter at the end of the day is that it has a little bit more mobility, and then also it has an APCR round, which makes it 5.7. But it's incredibly just a non-compete vehicle for the vehicles that you're going to be facing. You're just basically going to see tanks that can pin you, so there's not really a huge reason to go over this tank whenever it comes to weak spot wise. The whole tank itself, for most vehicles at 5.7, is a weak spot. So now we're going on to the Jumbo Shermans, which actually have a bit of armor, which we can actually show some weak spots for. So as you can see with the Jumbos, you have two variants of them. You have the 75 and also you have the 76. The 75 is only within the American as well as the French tree, while the 76 is only within the American tree, but we're going to be covering both of these at the same time because they basically have the same armor whenever it comes to their tanks. Now we are back in the T-34 because I want to show you guys something to not be scared of Jumbos whenever it comes to them in general, because a lot of people get scared once they see a Jumbo, they panic, and then they most likely will get shot and killed. So the way that you take on Jumbos is you do this most of the time. Just shoot the gun out. I mean, I'm being seriously honest with you. If you can disable a Jumbo, it is basically the easiest kill in the world, even if you're in one of the worst tanks ever. But let's just say, for example, that you only have one shot. Like he has a teammate over there or something. If you start moving, he will just kill you. The way that you kill Jumbos is you go for this area right there, which is the MG port. The problem about this MG port is that it probably will be bushed up. It probably will have some sort of knickknack on it whenever it comes to decorations. So use your MG. Just remember it's on the left side of the tank itself towards the bottom, and get rid of the bushes and all that sort of stuff, and then shoot the MG port, which is a very easy kill for the Jumbo. Now, another thing about the Jumbo is that if you angle the Jumbo at all, or someone angles it just any, like I'm talking about not even that major of an angle, you can actually abuse this tank whenever it comes to its side. So like even like right in here, I think we should be able to pin. If you can get a shell to go between the track and between the armor about right in here, which we need a little bit more angle to it, you can actually get it to pin, which is kind of crazy, and it's a weak spot I think a lot of people don't even know about. And if you have a like higher pinning gun, you can actually just go directly through the track itself. But as you can see, it's a very easy shot even for a T-34E, which I would consider is a gun that you'll never pretty much see as the Jumbo. It's basically going to pin every single time, which is a really good thing. Even if you have like really punchy guns, you can go through it as well. Another thing to note about the Jumbos is that some people go for the turret. I would never go for this at all. If you see a Jumbo from the side, never ever shoot for the turret. The turret itself is extremely strong whenever it comes to the Jumbo. If you ever get on the side of Jumbos, I wouldn't even shoot here. Like, yes, you can pin it sometimes, but you never know when it's going to be like a wild angle or something like that where you just won't be able to pin. Always go for the bottom of the track down here. Try not to hit the track because you might get volumetric. But that is just going to be an easy shot for the Jumbo. And also SPAs, which have lower actual pin, can go for the lower track portion of the jumbos and kill it pretty much every single time. Now you do have a weak spot which you're going to switch vehicles for to kind of show it off whenever it comes to the turret, but overall just remember this: the turret itself is the strongest thing about the jumbo. The hull also is very, very strong, but at the same time it can be very much like vulnerable to many of the cannons within Warthunder. So we're actually in the Panther now, and it's a weak spot for the jumbo that is something that you should always know of. It's a very common misconception, and I'll show you another vehicle just for example with the Panther itself. Whenever you see vehicles like this, you may not ever have to go for the weak spot if you have a good enough gun. For example, with the Panther, you can just hit right there and pretty much upper frontal plate jumbos. The only problem about it is it depends on the range and also depends on the angle. So if you're at an angle of the jumbos and they're angled to you, you might not be able to pin that area of the tank. But if you're close enough to them, I'd say within like 100 to maybe 200 meters, you can just go directly for that area with a Panther with the 75 and pin it pretty much every time. But look at this example right now when I'm going to show you when you should go for a weak spot and then when you shouldn't go for a weak spot, and then we'll continue with the Shermans. So now we're in the hangar for just a second because I want to show you guys something about weak spots in general and just a general tip whenever it comes to learning about new weak spots within Warthunder, because sometimes you may learn different weak spots for different tanks, but then you go up about a rating or you get a different kind of gun, and then your weak spots that you learned are kind of irrelevant. And I see this as a problem. Like I asked Fanatical Freeman if he ever shoots Panthers with like the T-34, for example, from America in the turret like that, and then doesn't kill them, even though if you use the T-34, if you have it right here, you can go directly through the like actual hull of the tank, which is just a way better shot. You're going to get way more penetration, and then also you're going to get way more shrapnel. So that's just one thing to know. I want to tag it onto this video is that sometimes, while yes, you may have weak spots like going for the turret, which is the main weak spot you go for, just remember to kind of review your tanks and what kind of cannons that you have. And maybe there's different ways that you can actually engage different tanks, because for example, with the or the mutant over here, you can directly just go through the front of like a Panther, and you'll see a ton of these guys whenever it comes to Warthunder. And it's always just something to have a mental note of. All right, so now we're going to have like a quick fire session for the rest of the tanks, because once again, I'm going to be honest with you guys, most of these tanks, the whole tank itself is a weak spot whenever it comes to Warthunder. And the main thing to just really note about them is how to identify them and how to know which tank that you're actually facing, because after this one right here, we're going through the rest of the nations whenever it comes to their vehicles, whenever it comes to the Shermans. But the last one that America has, and probably the most unique one, is what I would consider the mutant like -1. Like this thing is a Sherman that has the T-26 turret on it, which makes it a little bit prevalent whenever it comes to actually stopping rounds with the turret. The turret itself is probably really strong compared to like the rest of the tank. But even if you have a strong tank, you still have weak spots for a turret. The thing about this vehicle is that if it gets hull down, once again, just like all the Shermans, you just go for the little turret ring and it's basically one shot every time. But if you can see this tank, like just sitting out in the open, pretty much just go through the frontal hull. It's going to be very, very easy to actually kill this tank right here, which is the wonderful M4 T-26. So now we're on to the two Firefly variants, and the really only difference between them is that they have the actual little sticking out portions of the tank compared to this one. This one right here, the Sherman 1C, is only in the Italian tech tree, but this Firefly is in with both of them whenever it comes to the tech tree. The only thing about it is, once again, it basically has no armor. The only thing that you really need to note about it and how to determine it's a Firefly is kind of just look at the actual muzzle brake of the cannon. The muzzle brake has like a little like ball looking size to it, so it makes it super easy to figure out which of the Fireflies you're actually shooting at. But both of these tanks, relatively speaking, basically have no armor compared to what they're going to be fighting against. Now we have Israel, and we have the M51s. The M51s are actually pretty different compared to all the other Shermans because they don't have a fast firing 76 or 75, but they also lose the stabilizer. So you have a vehicle which has a ton of pen with its 105mm heat shell, but at the same time, you have a vehicle which also loses a bunch of the features that the rest of the Shermans have within the tech tree. So honestly, to me, they're a little bit bad, but the way that you can really determine what they are is the color scheme of the tank itself. And then also just look at the muzzle brake. You can definitely tell that the cannon itself just looks different. You do have two variants of the M51. You have one with the cast hole, which is this one right here, and then you have the welded hole, which is this one. The welded hole is automatically just better because, as you can see, there is less of a weak spot on it, but you can still just upper frontal plate it with most cannons that you'll see around a battle rating of 6.0. And this one is even worse because you don't have the angles, which may save you sometimes whenever it comes to Warthunder. And now we're finally on to France with the 2 last Shermans that you'll see within the game, which is the M4A1 FL10, and then you have the M4A4 SA50. Both of these cannons had both of these tanks basically have the exact same cannon, except for this one has an autoloader, and then this one has a better round. So that's the really only difference between these two vehicles. Whenever it comes out, you also have a different turret, so that's one thing to note. But yeah, the way that you know that you're facing like an FL10 is that the turret looks like an AMX-13, and then this one right here, the gun itself is very, very long. And then also you can look at the muzzle brake and then realize it doesn't have a 50 cal. But yeah, both of these vehicles, once again, basically have no armor whenever it comes to the battle ratings that they'll be put at. So yeah, overall, that is the Shermans whenever it comes to Warthunder. There is a ton of them whenever it comes to the game, and it is very valuable to know how to destroy all these Shermans, especially the low tier ones, because there's so many of them whenever it comes to the game, and it's very valuable to just know weak spots. But yeah, overall, that concludes this video. If you have any like tips or tricks you want to see within future videos of Warthunder, leave that stuff in the comments, and I'll definitely try to make a video on it. So I hope everyone has a wonderful day, and we'll see you guys in the next Warthunder video.